beautiful girl warms the heart of a cursed beast. But what if the beast wasn't the best option for Belle? We're here to tell you all the reasons that Belle should have ended up with Gaston instead of the beast.
What?
The 1991 animated movie Beauty and the Beast is one of the most iconic fairy tales of all time. When Disney decided to take on the old French story, it stole the hearts of people everywhere. It's a classic happily ever after, but Belle was the first princess to have a more dynamic personality. Belle is an inventor's daughter in a small French village. She hates her poor provincial life and uses reading to escape. She's quiet and smart and always has her nose stuck in a book. The other villagers think she's odd and just don't like her.
What about that Gaston? He's a handsome fella.
Everyone except Gaston, that is. Gaston is the most popular man in the village. He is a war veteran and he thinks really highly of himself. Women throw themselves at him, but he only has eyes for Belle. Of course, he wants to marry her because she is the most beautiful girl in town.
Say you'll marry me.
He tries to propose to her, rather forcefully, but she rejects him. Belle's father gets taken prisoner by the Beast. The Beast was a prince who was so cruel that he and his whole castle were cursed. His household staff are enchanted objects. He lives in solitude and he is totally miserable. He will be doomed to be a beast forever unless he can find true love. Belle comes to free her father. The household objects think that Belle could be the one to break the curse. Unfortunately, the Beast is kind of a monster. He's mean and has some serious anger issues.
You'll come out or I'll break down the door!
Belle's father, Maurice, tries to recruit Gaston and the villagers to help rescue Belle, but they think he's crazy. Meanwhile, Belle starts to realize that maybe the Beast isn't all bad. They fall in love. Belle comes back to save her father from being put in a mental asylum. She uses the Beast's mirror to prove that Maurice isn't crazy. The villagers are terrified. Gaston uses their fear to rally their support. They march to the castle to fight the Beast.
I say we kill the beast!
Gaston and the Beast have a showdown, and Gaston falls off the castle. The spell breaks, and Belle lives happily ever after as a princess. Gaston seems like a terrible choice for a husband, but if you dig a little deeper, you might realize he's not all that bad. There are several theories that suggest he's the way better choice, and he also has some redeeming qualities.
I'm just full of surprises.
Let's take a look at some of his better characteristics. My, what a guy, that Gaston. Gaston's bestie, LeFou, has no problem finding good traits in Gaston. He sings a whole song about it. No one fights like Gaston. No one breaks hearts or eats as many eggs as Gaston. And Gaston seems to think he's perfect. But we aren't talking about all of these reasons that Gaston isn't such a terrible guy. An episode of Tuned Up makes some great points about Gaston's character when compared to the Beast. First of all, the Beast keeps a ton of secrets. There's a whole wing of his castle that Belle can't go to. He doesn't tell Belle why his whole castle is enchanted, so she probably feels pretty crazy with talking teapots around. And when she finds the rose, he doesn't tell her what it's for. If she's supposed to be there her whole life, she kind of deserves to know. Gaston is not a secretive guy. He says exactly what is on his mind. The whole village knew when he was going to propose to Belle. Honesty is the best policy in any relationship. Gaston is a healthy guy. He doesn't eat fancy, multi-course meals all the time. He's in great shape. Belle wouldn't have to worry about becoming a widow anytime soon. He's also got a better living situation than the Beast. He lives in town, near the library that Belle loves so much. He's also near her father. The Beast lives in a lonely, isolated castle. You can't even go hiking in the woods near the castle because of the terrifying man-eating wolves. Speaking of those wolves, Gaston is a hunter and a former soldier.
You're the greatest hunter in the whole world!
I know.
He totally protects Belle. Gaston is also better looking than the Beast, at least before the curse is broken. For one thing, he's human, and though he says every last inch of him is covered in hair, he's clearly exaggerating. Have you ever seen the Beast? He is way hairier. Belle and Gaston would have good-looking kids. Gaston is not nearly as lazy as the Beast. He lives alone, so he knows how to do stuff around the house. Do you think Belle would ever get the Beast to help put together her new bookshelf? No, he is a prince. He wouldn't even know where to start. Gaston hunts, so he could provide plenty of meat for the table. And while Gaston clearly has some major flaws, he isn't mean enough to get cursed. We're looking at you, Beast. Gaston may be arrogant and superficial, but he didn't refuse an old woman to stay in his castle during a storm. We're just saying, there's a big difference between being a snob and being cruel. Finally, Gaston is ready to settle down. The Beast has no desire to fall in love, even though he needs to in order to break the curse. Gaston is a single guy who can have any girl he wants, except for Belle. He could continue to date and live that bachelor life, but he wants a wife, and he isn't settling for just anyone. He is ready to be a father and take care of a family.
Strapping boys like me.
Gaston isn't afraid of commitment. Doesn't Belle want someone who wants her? There's also one major point we're overlooking. The Beast imprisoned both Belle and her father. He was going to lock Maurice away forever. Maurice didn't do anything wrong. He was caught in a storm and was being chased by evil wolves. He was just looking for shelter. The Beast literally has a whole castle. He obviously learned nothing from the enchantress who cursed him. And if he was just worried that Maurice would tell people about him, why did he agree to let him go? He just wanted a prisoner. But why? Imprisoning people is not a good start to a healthy relationship. And he threatened to let Belle starve just because she didn't want to eat with a guy who took her captive.
Then go ahead and starve!
Now that we've figured out that maybe Gaston isn't all that bad, let's look at some other reasons that Belle should have married Gaston. This next one is huge. The French Revolution. The next reason that Belle should have married Gaston is going to require a bit of a history lesson. This isn't your boring history class. Let's just say that if Belle married the Beast, she would probably not have lived very long. As Dana Schwartz from The Observer points out, in a PowerPoint, Belle's best chance at a happily ever after would have been to marry Gaston. Beauty and the Beast takes place in the late 18th century France. We know this from the styles and when the original story was written, but the late 1700s were not a happy time for France. Gaston also says he fought in a war, which was probably the 7 Years' War. So we have a pretty good idea of exactly when the movie takes place. There was a lot of poverty in the 18th century France, but the nobility lived really lush lives. You saw that big feast that Lumiere and the rest of the objects served Belle. That's pretty standard for the royals of France at this time. Meanwhile, regular people could barely afford flour to make bread. People were starving, and the royals wouldn't do anything. After the American Revolution was successful, the French decided enough was enough. They wanted a democracy to make everyone more equal. They were tired of starving while the nobles were having huge feasts and grand balls all the time. But the French Revolution turned really violent. There are reports that the streets of Paris ran red. We're talking horror movie level violent. The country went bankrupt, but the king continued to tax people to live his lavish lifestyle. All of the other aristocrats had been largely exempt from taxes, but the people decided it was time that the rich help fix the problem. Citizens stormed the castles and estates of the rich. They stole from them and resorted to violence. The Third Estate, which was all the regular people, vowed to make change. They stormed the Bastille, which is where a bunch of weapons were kept. Then it got worse and more violent. Eventually, the king and queen were sentenced to execution, and tons of nobles had similar sentences during this time. This is where the phrase "off with their heads" comes from. It was not pretty. If Belle had married the Beast, she would have been a princess. This was not a good time to be a royal. Within just a few years, they would have lost all of their power. They probably would have lost a lot of their money and their home, and there's a really good chance that they would have not survived. That's just sad. Gaston, on the other hand, would have survived. He was a member of the Third Estate, and he was a war veteran. He would have not been a target of the anti-noble rioters, and if a riot had broken out, he would have been able to protect Belle. Now, Belle wouldn't have been able to know exactly what would happen in France, but she had to know about the general unrest and how people felt about the nobility. She was a smart girl. Marrying Gaston would have protected her future a lot better. The Beast isn't real? This next theory will blow your mind. Keep in mind that this theory only applies to the animated movie and the musical. It does not work with the live-action movie starring Emma Watson. This theory was published on Reddit and came from a user named Fox in the Show. This person has concluded that the Beast never existed, and marrying a figment of your imagination is possible. First of all, let's look at all the ways that Gaston and the Beast are similar. This is really important to understand this theory. Both Gaston and the Beast are at first undesirable to Belle. They are both not very nice people. They don't read. Belle teaches the Beast to read.
Well, here, I'll help you.
Gaston says he doesn't understand how she understands books with no pictures. They are both violent and brutish. They don't act very smart and are very superficial. Belle loves to read fairy tales. The creator of this theory believes that Belle actually married Gaston, and she imagines her life with a beast. That's how she imagines Gaston. The theory suggests that Maurice actually gave his blessing to Gaston in Belle's marriage. Belle, having no better options, marries Gaston. She thinks he's pretty awful, but girls didn't always have a lot of say in who they married back then. Because she's unhappy and has an active imagination, she imagines the story of Beauty and the Beast. but Gaston is the beast that she changes and learns to love. The cast where the beast supposedly lives is less than 1 day's ride away from the village, but none of the villagers know about the prince there. If it's all in Belle's head, it explains why the villagers aren't aware of the castle. But why would Belle imagine that her father went through all of that violence? Well, she loves her father, but she is angry that he married her off. Her conflicted feelings come out in her made-up story. The castle also has all the things she wants. Mrs. Potts is like a mother. She has friends there, and it isn't the poor provincial life that she hates so much. She ends up falling for the beast, aka Gaston. Or maybe she just wants to fall in love, but she's worried that Gaston will end up ruining it. She's created this elaborate fantasy in her head to deal with her unhappiness and conflicting emotions. Whoa, that makes the story way sadder. Do you think this theory that there is no beast is true? Who do you think Belle should have married? Sound off with your own theories in the comment section.
I just don't deserve you.
Whoa!
And that's it for why Belle should have married Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. Give this video a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.